October 7, 1571. The calm waters of the Gulf of Patras shatter under the thunder of cannon fire. More than 400 ships, carrying nearly 200,000 men, collide in one of the largest naval battles the world has ever seen. Imagine the sound. The oars cutting through water, the drums beating time, the cries of chained rowers straining for breath. For decades, the Ottoman Empire seemed unstoppable. But on this day, Christian Europe gathered its courage, and in 4 brutal hours, the fate of the Mediterranean would hang in the balance. This is Hive, where history speaks. Imagine standing on the shores of the eastern Mediterranean in the mid-16th century. Everywhere you look, the banners of the crescent fly. The Ottoman Empire, under the mighty Suleiman the Magnificent, had stretched its power across 3 continents. From the deserts of Arabia to the gates of Vienna, the Ottomans seemed unstoppable. Their fleets roamed the seas like wolves, raiding Christian coasts, capturing towns, and dragging thousands into slavery. To many in Europe, it felt as if an ancient tide was swallowing their world. But empires rarely rest. After Suleiman's death in 1566, his son Selim II, mocked by his own people as the sot for his love of wine and indulgence, sought to prove himself through conquest. His eyes turned to Cyprus, a jewel of the Venetian Republic. Cyprus was more than an island. It was a lifeline for Venetian trade, a fertile source of grain, and a symbol of prestige. In 1570, Ottoman armies landed, sweeping across its cities. Nicosia fell quickly, its defenders slaughtered. Only Famagusta held out, defiant behind its walls. When it too surrendered in 1571, the Ottomans broke their word. The Venetian commander Marco Antonio Bragadin was flayed alive, his skin stuffed with straw as a warning. Across Europe, the horror spread like wildfire. To Christians, Cyprus was not just lost, it was desecrated. And yet, even as Selim's banners flew over the island, he hungered for more. His admirals now dreamed of pushing west, of breaking Venice, of striking into the heart of Italy itself. The tide of empire rolled forward, daring anyone to resist. A league forged in fear. Across Europe, panic spread like wildfire. Venice mourned its lost colony, its economy strangled without Cyprus's fertile grain. Spain, though rich with silver from the New World, felt the Ottoman shadow stretching across the Mediterranean, threatening Naples, Sicily, and its very lifelines. And in Rome, Pope Pius V, an austere Dominican, saw not only a political crisis, but a holy war. To him, the advance of Islam was nothing less than an assault on Christendom itself. Yet Europe was fractured. The Protestant Reformation had torn nations apart, and Catholic princes eyed each other with suspicion. Still, Pius refused to relent. He preached, pleaded, and bargained, summoning kings and dukes to a common cause. Slowly, a coalition emerged. Venice, desperate for survival; Spain, under the cautious but resolute Philip II; the Papal States, Genoa, Savoy, Tuscany, and even the warrior monks of the Knights of Malta. Together they formed the Holy League, a fragile alliance held together by fear as much as faith. In August 1571, a banner blessed by the Pope arrived in Naples, destined for the flagship of a young commander, Don John of Austria, the 24-year-old illegitimate son of Emperor Charles V. Charismatic, untested, and burning with ambition, Don John carried the hopes of Christendom. When the fleets gathered in Messina, Sicily, the sight was awe-inspiring. Row upon row of galleys, banners of lions, crosses, and saints fluttering in the wind. But beneath the pomp lay mistrust. Venetians sneered at Genoese. Spaniards resented Venetian arrogance. Old grudges lingered. The Holy League was powerful but fragile, united against the Ottomans, yet always one quarrel away from tearing itself apart. Storm on the horizon. By late September, the fleets of the Holy League were ready to sail. In Messina's crowded harbor, soldiers sharpened blades, priests blessed the men, and galley slaves strained under the weight of supplies. But unity was fragile. Tensions between allies threatened to erupt before the enemy was even in sight. A quarrel between Venetian and Spanish crews spiraled into bloodshed, leaving men dead. Sebastiano Venier, the fiery Venetian commander, executed Spanish offenders without consulting Don John. Fury rippled through the camp, and for a moment it seemed Christians would fight each other before they ever faced the Turks. Only the calm intervention of Marcantonio Colonna prevented disaster. Meanwhile, the Ottoman fleet gathered across the sea. Under the command of Muezzin Zada Ali Pasha, They prepared for battle with grim confidence. For decades, Ottoman ships had dominated the Mediterranean. Their admiral promised his Christian galley slaves freedom if victory was won. To the west, Don John countered with words of fire. There is no paradise for cowards. As the fleets moved toward one another, fate hung in the balance. Don John's flagship, La Real, stood at the center of his line, towering above the waves. Beside him sailed Venier and Colonna, their banners snapping in the wind. On the flanks, Agostino Barbarigo and Gianandrea Doria prepared their squadrons, while Alvaro de Bazan commanded a reserve ready to plug any breach. On October 6th, the Christians sighted the Ottoman fleet near the Gulf of Patras. Dawn was approaching. Both sides prayed, sharpened their weapons, and braced themselves. By morning, the horizon would blaze with war. The dawn of Lepanto. The morning of October 7th, 1571, broke with a restless silence over the Gulf of Patras. The water was calm, the air heavy with anticipation. As the mist lifted, two armadas revealed themselves, massive formations stretching across the horizon, their banners glowing in the pale light of dawn. More than 400 ships now faced each other, a sight not seen since antiquity. Don John's Holy League drew up in a long line, its wings anchored to coast and open sea, its heart braced by 6 Venetian galleasses, floating fortresses bristling with cannon. At the center stood La Real, Don John's flagship, flanked by Venier's Venetian galley and Colonna's papal standard. To the left, near the shore, Agostino Barbarigo commanded his Venetians. To the right, Gianandrea Doria held the Genoese and Spanish squadrons. Behind, Alvaro de Bazan's reserve waited, ready to strike where the line might falter. Facing them, Ali Pasha arrayed his Ottoman fleet in a great crescent, its arms stretching wide to envelop the Christians. To his right stood Mehmed Sirocco of Alexandria, cunning and fierce. To his left, the Algerian corsair Uluch Ali, a master of deception and seamanship. Ali himself commanded the center, aboard the mighty galley Sultana, packed with janissaries and archers. At first, the wind favored the Ottomans, their sails swelling as they advanced. But by midday, it shifted, blowing westward, filling Christian banners and pushing the League's ships into position. Then, with a thunderous roar, the galleasses opened fire, their cannons tearing into the Ottoman vanguard. The calm sea of morning erupted into chaos. Fire and steel. The first cannon blasts echoed like thunder across the Gulf. Venetian galleasses, monstrous compared to ordinary galleys, spat iron into the Ottoman lines, shattering hulls and splintering decks. Dozens of Turkish ships reeled under the barrage, their formations thrown into confusion. Yet Ali Pasha pressed forward, urging his men through the storm of fire. To retreat was unthinkable. Then the lines collided. Oars snapped, hulls groaned, and the sea filled with smoke and screams. Men leapt from ship to ship, blades flashing in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Muskets roared, arrows darkened the air, and grenades hurled from decks exploded in showers of fire. It was less a naval battle than an infantry clash fought on floating platforms, where every plank became a killing ground. On the Holy League's left, near the shore, Barbarigo's Venetians locked horns with Sirocco's galleys. The fighting was savage. Ships jammed together so tightly that men fought shoulder to shoulder, unable to tell sea from deck. Barbarigo himself, visor lifted to issue commands, fell to an arrow through the eye. Yet his men fought on, reinforcements pouring in from the reserve to tip the balance. Slowly, Sirocco's line began to waver. In the center, Don John's La Real charged straight toward the Sultana. The two massive flagships collided with such force that timbers cracked like lightning. Grappling hooks flew, soldiers poured across decks, and the air filled with the clash of steel. Around them, more than 100 galleys converged, turning the sea into a single sprawling battlefield of blood and fire. Death of a sultan's admiral. In the heart of the chaos, two giants of wood and iron lay locked together, La Real and the Sultana. The decks shook beneath the weight of hundreds of soldiers as Spanish tercios and Ottoman janissaries clashed in brutal combat. Arquebuses cracked at point-blank range, swords rang, and pikes thrust through the smoke. The fighting was desperate, wave after wave of men surging across the gap, each determined to seize the other's banner. Ali Pasha stood firm at the prow of his flagship, his turban high, his sword flashing in the sunlight. He had promised his galley slaves freedom if victory was won, and the Janissaries fought with relentless fury. For a moment, it seemed the Sultana might overwhelm Don John's ship. Ottoman soldiers stormed La Real's deck, driving the defenders back step by step. But Don John refused to yield. Rallying his men, he counterattacked, pushing the Ottomans off his deck and onto their own. At that moment, Marcantonio Colonna's papal flagship rammed alongside, disgorging fresh troops into the melee. The tide shifted. Inch by inch, the Christians forced their way across the Sultana, hacking through Janissary ranks in a storm of steel and blood. Then, in the thick of the struggle, Ali Pasha fell, struck down in the crush of battle. His head was severed, raised high on a pike, and displayed for all to see. The banner of the Holy League was hoisted over the Ottoman flagship. A roar erupted from Christian throats. Across the line, the Ottoman center began to crumble. The struggle on the flanks. While the Ottoman center collapsed with the death of Ali Pasha, the battle on the flanks raged with merciless intensity. To the north, near the shallow coast, Mehmed Sirocco's right wing had already been shattered. Surrounded and wounded, Sirocco was dragged from his sinking galley and executed by Venetian hands. His remaining ships broke and fled, leaving the shoreline littered with wreckage and corpses. But in the south, the picture was far darker for the Christians. Gianandrea Doria commanded the League's right, facing the Algerian corsair Uluch Ali, a cunning admiral who had spent his life raiding Mediterranean coasts. Uluch Ali's squadrons outnumbered Doria's nearly 2-to-1, and he used his advantage with ruthless skill. While Doria cautiously stretched his line south to avoid being encircled, he opened a dangerous gap between his wing and Don John's center. Uluch Ali seized the moment. With speed and precision, he swung his galleys through the breach, falling upon a cluster of Christian ships. Among them was the flagship of the Knights of Malta, which fought valiantly, but was overwhelmed. 15 Christian galleys were surrounded, their crews slaughtered or dragged into chains. For a terrifying moment, it seemed Uluch Ali might roll up the Christian line from the flank and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. But Alvaro de Bazan's reserve surged forward, crashing into Uluch Ali's men. And with the Ottoman center already lost, Don John and Colonna turned south to join the fight. Surrounded, the corsair realized the battle was slipping away. Victory and carnage. By mid-afternoon, the waters of Lepanto were no longer blue but crimson. The sea itself seemed choked with wreckage, splintered oars, shattered timbers, and the bodies of the dead drifting among burning hulls. The thunder of cannon gave way to the screams of drowning men and the clash of steel on decks slick with blood. It was no longer battle but slaughter. The Holy League's left had triumphed, the center was victorious, and now the reserve pressed Uluch Ali's battered wing. Realizing the day was lost, Uluch Ali cut his tow rope, abandoned captured prizes, and fought his way free with a handful of ships. 87 galleys followed him into retreat, but hundreds more lay broken or captured in his wake. The proud Ottoman fleet, once feared across the Mediterranean, was annihilated in 4 brutal hours. The cost was staggering. The Holy League had lost over 7,000 men, many of them Venetian sailors and soldiers who had borne the brunt of combat. But their victory freed some 15,000 Christian slaves chained to Ottoman oars, men who stumbled ashore, weeping, their backs scarred by whip, now tasting freedom for the first time in years. On the Ottoman side, the devastation was unimaginable. 20 to 30,000 dead, their admirals slain, their flagships seized, their aura of invincibility shattered. Never in living memory had the empire suffered such a naval disaster. The Mediterranean was littered with silence, broken only by the lapping waves and the groans of the dying. Victory was won, but at a terrible price. Legacy of Lepanto. When the smoke cleared, the world awoke to news that seemed almost impossible. The Ottomans, long feared as invincible at sea, had been dealt a crushing defeat. Across Europe, bells rang in celebration. Pope Pius V declared the victory a miracle, crediting the Virgin Mary and instituting the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary. In Spain, Philip II was hailed as the defender of Christendom. Venice rejoiced, though its heart still mourned the permanent loss of Cyprus. For ordinary Christians, the triumph of Lepanto became a symbol of hope, proof that the Ottoman tide could be stopped. And yet, reality was more complex. Within 6 months, the Ottomans had rebuilt a fleet nearly as large as the one destroyed. Though the Holy League had won the day, they failed to follow up their victory. Political quarrels soon resurfaced, alliances unraveled. By 1573, Venice signed peace, ceding Cyprus to the Ottomans and paying a heavy indemnity. The war ended with the Ottomans still dominant in the eastern Mediterranean. But Lepanto's true power lay not in territory gained or lost, but in myth and memory. Like Salamis before it, the battle was remembered as a clash of civilizations, a desperate stand of East against West, Islam against Christendom. Artists painted it, poets praised it, and Miguel de Cervantes, who fought and was wounded at Lepanto, called it the greatest day of his life. The Mediterranean would never again be the same, but neither would Europe's belief in itself. Lepanto proved that even the mightiest empire could bleed. The Battle of Lepanto was more than a clash of ships. It was a clash of worlds, of faiths, of human will. In just 4 hours, the Mediterranean witnessed a storm of fire and steel that would echo through centuries. For some, it was the end of fear, the moment Christendom learned it could resist the Ottoman tide. For others, it was a fleeting triumph, a reminder that even great victories can fade if unity is lost. But above all, Lepanto remains a story of people, of chained slaves who found freedom, of sailors who faced impossible odds, of leaders whose pride and courage shaped history. It is a reminder that history is never just about empires and maps. It is about human choices, human sacrifices, and human dreams. And now, centuries later, the lessons of Lepanto still whisper across the waves that courage can change destiny, that unity can overcome fear, and that even the mightiest powers are not invincible. This has been Era Hive, where history speaks. If you felt the weight of these stories, if you could almost hear the cannons thunder and the oars creak, then help us keep history alive. Like this video, share it with others who love the past, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next chapter in our journey through time. History is not silent. It speaks to us through battles, through voices, through memory, and together we will keep listening.